All right, guys, let's get started. First of all, standing room only, so thank you everyone for joining. I know it's after lunch, so some of you are digesting that mac and cheese, but we've got a whole track on marketplaces, on demand, and on sharing economy. So I'm excited to kick off this whole track that we've created for people who are really interested in this space. And my name is Devang Sachdev. I have the pleasure of leading the content team at Twilio. And I want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. So the way we've been trying to figure this space out for a while, myself, my colleague, Elisa, and a few others. And one way that we're looking at marketplaces, and you'll hear these terms, marketplaces, on-demand services, listing and directory services, used interchangeably, is that both on-demand services like Uber, Airbnb, Lyft, or Uber and Lyft that on a press of a button it shows up at your doorstep, are sort of in the on-demand services side of the spectrum. And on the other side, you have things like listing services or directory services. Avo is one of them. Airbnb could be considered another one too. So, and when you think about sharing economy, that's a layer on top of this landscape, depending on who you employ and who you partner up with. So just wanted to make sure that we all use the right terms, or you understood the way we were describing these different types of businesses. What we also find with marketplaces is that fundamentally they have a very similar business model, which is to connect suppliers and consumers. So that said, we've actually geeked out a little bit on this, and we created an internal tool for ourselves that helped us slice and dice this space slightly further. And very soon we're going to make it available to you guys too. So you can dig in as much as you like and break it down by not just marketplaces as far as listing services or on-demand services, but also what is exchanged on the platform, how communication is used in the platform, what's the frequency of exchange on the platform too. So something for you to keep in your back pocket. All right, so every successful marketplace builder needs to build three things. One is liquidity by making sure that they attract and retain both consumers and producers. The second thing, and a very important thing, is that they need to build trust. They need to build trust with their users, and they need to build trust within their users. And finally, in order for successful marketplaces to stand out, they need to build experiences that differentiate themselves from their peers. So today's talk is going to focus on trust. And trust to me is a very funny term. Every time someone says, trust me, there's a high likelihood that I'm going to doubt what they're going to say. But it's a very important question. It's a very important thing for businesses to build trust with their users. And for marketplaces, as I said, it's twice as important because they not only need to build trust between the user and the platform, they need to build trust between the users. So I wanted to emphasize something. I learned something from a recent TED Talk by Airbnb's founder, Joe Gebbia. And he did an experiment that I would like to do with you guys if you're up for it. So anyone up for the experiment? Right. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take out your phone. Let's see them out. All right, I want you to turn them on and unlock them. And then I want you to go into your Photos app and open up your Photos app. It's open? Okay, now pass your phone on to the person sitting on your right. I sense panic in the room, and I don't know about you guys, but I would be panicked if you had my photo app open in your hand.
Look at you.
Trust me, you do not want to see this. Another funny thing about trust, when you say trust me, you do not want to see, you actually now do want to see what else is in there. But this is the experience that most people have when they open up their homes to strangers through Airbnb, or when they start driving for Uber or Lyft and show up at your door and allow people to sit in the car. So, building this trust and getting a sensation of what it feels to put your trust in somebody else's hands is a very human thing. It's ingrained in our DNA to be skeptical of others, but the way things are going with sharing economy, the way we're building out apps for on-demand and listing services through marketplaces, it's certainly tapping into something that's very innate to us. So with that, I would like to start our discussion today with Chelsea Rustrom. And Chelsea, she's not only a representative of people who are involved in the sharing economy space, but Chelsea has written a book called Is Shareable Life, just to get a perspective as to what does it mean to be playing in this space. So Chelsea, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get involved?
Yeah, so I think I started off really young, actually. I started off as a teenage entrepreneur and had nobody to play with. It wasn't cool to be an entrepreneur when I was young. I started when I was maybe 14 or 15. And by the time I graduated from college and had my first job, one of my really good friends in Santa Cruz, Jeremy Neuner, started something called NextSpace, which was one of the very first co-working spaces. And I kind of co-worked from there and helped build that community from the ground up as a member and learned just a lot about that. And then I was thinking, gosh, I really need to travel, and I hadn't really traveled much yet, at least not alone. So I went off and I traveled and I used couch surfing, and this was still pretty early on. So couch surfing is a huge leap of trust. You're staying in someone's home for free, and you don't know them. They're a virtual stranger to you. You just see their profile and their ratings and reviews, much like you do on Airbnb. And I just had these really beautiful transformational experiences. So I was like, wow, there's really something to this. Like staying in someone's home develops this natural trust, like right away. And what does that do to our relationships with each other? So that's how I originally got involved. And then I kind of got back from that and thought, wow, this is really, really beautiful. I want to share it. But there's no real way to share, like, I stayed in someone's home and I had this crazy experience and all these serendipitous things that happened without actually seeing it or feeling it. So I convinced a friend I tried to convince a friend to do a documentary about it. Wow. Yeah. And he said no. And then I moved to San Francisco, and 5 days later I met a girl who's actually doing a documentary. And yeah, so I ended up being in the documentary. It's called One Couch at a Time. I traveled to do that as well. And then we all got back from that, and we were talking about, time, space, resources, all these things that people are doing and how we can share them through technology, and got really excited about it and wanted to share that with others. And we thought a really great vehicle for that would be a book. So that's actually where this book came from. I'm a co-author of it. There's 2 other co-authors. And that just changed my professional life too, because I was like, wow, like I should, move into helping these companies and helping spread these messages. So that's how I got involved.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, I've done a bunch of couch surfing trips, but never wrote a book about it. So props to you. So we're talking about trust. What does trust mean to you when we're talking about in the context of sharing economy?
Yeah, trust is interesting because I don't think about it necessarily as trust so much as I do reputation. And because you think about, you look at somebody online and why do you quote unquote trust them? You trust them maybe because you know where they work and what they do and who they associate with and what their interests are, and you see a photo of them, you have all this information about them. So I think these digital footprints that we've sort of left from the very beginning, people thought at the beginning that LinkedIn was crazy, like putting where you work. Like, what if someone stalks me? eBay was crazy too. People said, what if somebody sends a bomb? So, there's just different layers of how we've progressively evolved and how we think about trust and why we trust.
That's great. I think I, for one, have a false sense of security because I never thought about getting a bomb shipped to me through eBay. Can happen.
Also, can I say one more thing about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I host, through writing the book, it's a practical guide to the sharing economy. I did a lot of sharing experiments, and one of them was having lots of people stay in my studio apartment, maybe 15 feet away from my bed on my couch. So yeah, I took it pretty far. Yeah, but what I learned is, as I said earlier, I think that when you trust someone first and they trust you, it creates this connection that just is very bonding. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's totally right. And it's one thing to have this vague concept of trust, but I think when we were talking about platforms, I believe there's a systematic way of creating trust. Question that comes up is, whose responsibility is it to create the trust? Is it the platform's responsibility? Is it the user's responsibility to trust between each other? And if it's shared, then where do you draw the line? Where do you say that me as a platform, my responsibility ends and yours begins?
Yeah, I think it's everybody's responsibility, but I think it's much like a company where the CEO or the top level management sort of dictates and creates an environment where other people act and interact in a certain way, and that just spreads through the whole company. So a platform, I think, actually needs to think of themselves in terms of their providers and participants as nurturing that and creating an environment where everybody feels responsible, and they create that through ambassador programs and creating the feeling, and also thinking about how early users interact with, say, their drivers. Drivers need to think about how they act when somebody gets in the car, for example, or hosts, and making suggestions about that through the platform is something you can definitely do.
I mean, just talking about drivers, Lyft used to do these things, and you're talking about culture. How do you set up a culture within your platform that extends beyond your platform? To me, one classic example was I would sit in a Lyft, and they would fist bump me. So if you were driving, I would certainly still fist bump you.
Woo!
So what happened to it? Why do they not do it anymore? I don't know if you have any.
Yeah. So what's interesting is I think that they started off saying, let's create this really cool culture of cool drivers and make sure that everybody is someone that you'd want to hang out with. And let's do this fist bump, and maybe we'll tell people to have gum and candy in their car. And what they found later, I believe, is that people didn't actually like the fist bump, and not everybody wanted to sit up front. And Uber had created another culture, and so there was sort of this spread. But I think they've maintained that feeling of, wow, there's just maybe more of an upbeat and communal feeling, at least for me in Lyft, when I get in a Lyft car.
Yeah, no, I subscribe to that. So for companies a lot of people here in the audience who are actually trying to build a marketplace of their own, either it's an on-demand or it's a listing service, but what would you tell them as to why do they need to invest in trust, or what is the impact of not investing in trust from the get-go?
Yeah, so I might take that in slightly a different direction, because I think that trust and safety sort of go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And we really need to think about that also. So it's not just about the features that you build for trust, whether that be ratings and reviews and nurturing and creating an experience with early users, but also how do you react when there's an incident, right? How do you deal with that? And having a really valuable and well-trained trust and safety team is integral to that. Depending on what kind of on-demand or sharing economy platform you might have. So Airbnb, as many of you probably know, had an incident very early on where a woman's apartment, I believe, got ransacked in 2012, and that kind of led to them thinking oh wow, we can't have that, where people lose their homes, and that's our PR. So I think it was roughly related in timing that they created $1 million insurance policy for that. So having a trust and safety insurance and thinking about all of these things and how they work together and how your community works together, it's a wraparound experiance. Makes sense.
Yeah, and we'll definitely hear from Dan more about that.
Dan can tell you more.
Question on my list right here. I want to just briefly talk about, since you're so active in this space, where do you see it going? I mean, it seems like things have gotten off to a rocky start for some marketplaces, but for the most part, it's been working well. So what's next? What's next for a sharing economy?
Well, what I'm excited about, we talked about this before, is this idea of compensation beyond compensation. Mm-hmm. Whether that's compensating people, your drivers, your hosts, your providers, whoever that might be, whoever's the value creator, with equity or with more money or with bonuses or something. I'm actually really excited about how we can actually share through these platforms and through the overall experience. And we see that happening quite a bit. There's this thing called platform cooperativism, where platforms are actually building that community in from the ground up and from the business model level. Okay. So I think we'll begin to see more of that. And then on a different side, I also see this sort of like moving towards autonomous vehicles and robotics, and kind of moving a little bit away from the human interaction standpoint. So that's interesting too, and I know that's one of the topics here at Signal. So
yeah, in fact, we just talked this morning about how actually bots could help bring the human element into the conversation rather than peel away from it. So it's great to see that on one end it's impacting conversations, but on the other end it could also impact other types of businesses.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So Chelsea, I would like to see if you're ready to invite someone who can give us actual tips on what do you do to build trust as a feature of your platform. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we have Dan. So Dan, please join us.
Woo! Yeah, clap.
I haven't done anything yet.
So Dan, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Airbnb?
Yeah, great. So my name's Dan. It's great to be here. I joined Airbnb about 4.5 years ago, back when the company was about 70 people. I had a startup in London they acquired, and as part of that, I moved out here to San Francisco. So when I began, I actually started as an engineer because I was still in London getting a visa. I could keep the site running while everyone here was sleeping, because it used to go down sort of 8 hours at a time back in 2011. But today, I'm a director of products, and I lead our growth, infrastructure, and risk teams at Airbnb.
That's great. Thanks, Dan. You and I were discussing about this panel yesterday, and one of the things that we talked about was how the approach to trust has changed at Airbnb. I think it was really fascinating what you shared with me. I'd love to see if you can share with our audience too.
Yeah, so, and Chelsea sort of hinted on a little bit of this. When you begin a marketplace, and you had in your slide earlier, getting liquidity is almost the sort of first step. But you can build trust, but if there's no one using it, does it really matter? So a lot of our early work was really in how do we build liquidity, how do we even get anyone to kind of be okay with this idea. And then, 2012, EJ happened. This woman, EJ, tragically had a house ransacked. And actually, worse than that, the way we responded to it was not the way we would like to respond to these things. And so that kicked off what we called Operation Trust, where we really thought, actually, we have to really think a lot more systematically and a lot more thoroughly about how we deal with risk and trust. What is the relationship between risk and trust? And that led to the formation of our trust and safety team. So now we have 120 or so agents around the world in every single time zone, $1 million guarantee, personal liability insurance. Obviously, we had things like reviews and messaging, verified ID, and all these products that really began our sort of first idea of actually, how do we keep you safe and how do we build trust? Since then, we've come a long way in our understanding of trust, and we can talk more about it in a minute. But through a lot of user research, by looking at how trust is understood in different geographies, by different people, by different demographics, we've actually started to figure out ways we can tailor the product, tailor our messaging, our brand promise, and so on to much more systematic about trust.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm a big fan of product people, yourself included. But as product people, we all want to hear about frameworks. I know it's a big buzzword, but frameworks for communications, frameworks for design. Is there a framework for trust?
Yeah, there is. Or certainly we have one, or I have one. So, well, the problem with the word trust is it's like a word like authentic, or love, or a million other words. Everyone has an understanding of the word, but probably no two people's understanding is the same. So it makes it a very difficult word to throw around like, oh, I trust you, or what is trust, or we should build trust, or is that a trust feature? It's a very amorphous word that requires a little bit of definition. So for us, or for me, trust is the expectation you have, or the probability that you believe the expectations you have will be met by the other person. So if I trust you not to attack me, it means I believe in the future you are unlikely to actually attack me. Or if I trust that Airbnb will pay me on time, what I'm basically saying is I believe the probability is high that Airbnb will pay me when they are supposed to pay me. So trust really is about people feeling like what they expect to happen is going to happen. At one end of the spectrum, then, you have risk, or the trust that there is an absence of risk. So if you imagine a sort of Maslow pyramid of hierarchy of needs, in some sense, at the very bottom is risk. You want to believe that you are safe. Like if you travel on Airbnb, nothing bad will happen to you. If you're a host, that your possessions will be respected and nothing bad will happen. Above that, you then get into sort of, maybe you might call it personal trust, that the other person will treat me the way I would like to be treated, and I will treat them the way they would like to be treated. Above that, you have a sort of expectation about the actual experience you might have. If I expect the place has Wi-Fi, I'd like it to have Wi-Fi. If I think from the photographs that it's going to be this overlooking the Eiffel Tower, I'm expecting that to overlook the Eiffel Tower when I get there. Then on top of that, you then have what everyone is striving for, which are the sort of magical experiences. These moments that transcend all those things, the serendipity, the moments where you make lifelong friendships, where things happen that you didn't expect. But you can't really have those things if you don't have the things below in place. It's fine if that person recommends a local baker, but not if at the same time the kitchen's dirty, the Wi-Fi doesn't work, and you can't find the address. So that's kind of how we think about it. Within risk, when we have two teams, a risk team and a trust team, risk is really about preventing bad things from happening. So things like verified ID, things like the various machine learning models we build to detect chargebacks and all that kind of stuff. And then trust is much more of a sort of consumer-facing sort of product set that's really aimed at making sure we set expectations with people about what will happen when they actually use Airbnb, so that on top of that we can then build magical experiences.
Great.
That was a long answer.
I like how you framed it up, right? A pyramid where you start on the very top, you have these magical, or you said
magical experiences,
serendipity. You have your basic trust. I trust you. I'm going to get what I want from you, and you're going to get from me. And then you have your risk aversion at the very bottom. So I wanted to share something with the audience here about a review that kind of highlights a magical moment that took place at Airbnb. Bear with me, I'm going to read it out because I want to stay as verbatim to it as I can. So this review on Airbnb, written by a guest, goes, excellent house for old travelers with myocardial problems. Great access to hospitals. Javier and Alejandra will instantly become your guardian angels. They'll rush you to the doctors in case you need a heart surgery. And bring books to you when you're in recovery so that you don't get bored. They'll let you stay at your house without charging you anything extra. Highly recommended. I feel there's like a phenomenal story behind it. So, Dan, tell us about it.
Yeah, I remember that one. And this is sometimes hard to believe. People are good. Like, the vast majority of people are good people. I'm sure
you're telling it to people who just handed off their phone.
Yeah.
They know it.
Well, did anyone lose their pictures? Does anyone get anything bad happen? No. People in the world are good. Almost everybody, by to 5, 10, 15 nines, are good people. Of course, we live in a culture often where we are skeptical of people. We're brought up to fear other people, or at least fear the unknown if we don't know what to expect. But on Airbnb, once we take care of the risk and we build trust and people have their expectations met, actually the majority or many experiences become these kind of magical experiences. So in this case, the guest fell ill. And when you fall ill in a foreign city or a foreign place, it's a very scary experience. You're not quite sure where to go and what to do. In this case, the host went way above and beyond to help out and make sure the guest was well taken care of and had everything they needed and could make a recovery. There's actually another story I was thinking of when you read that.
Okay.
About a year or two ago. A similar review was left. It was a guest who was staying, I forget where, in the mountains somewhere in the world, and decided to hike the mountain or go running. Just taken their phone, just their running clothes, bottle of water, went running, and the weather turned. And they were stuck on the mountain and they couldn't get much phone reception. They were having a hard time calling the emergency services. The night was coming. And so they thought, nothing else to do. They just tried to send a message through Airbnb to their host saying, I'm stranded. I don't know where I am. Please help. Thankfully, Twilio obviously delivered the SMS to the host, so they got the message. And the host, just had no idea where this guest was, but organized sort of mountain rescue for days. Was helping organize the search. They eventually found the guest about 18 hours later, I think, in the middle of the night. Hypothermia was not in a great way. Again, let the guest stay for a week or two while they recovered, and they became lifelong friends ever since.
It's great. I've stayed in Airbnb several times. I wouldn't say I've had such a magical moment, but I've always had a great experience as being a guest in hostess homes. So I'm a new homeowner, and I don't think I'm ready to share my home yet. I keep having these visions where guests are coming into my house. They're having these out of control but epic parties. So I really appreciate people who put up their house for Airbnb. Question is, you're doing everything to build trust, but we're humans and we tend to do dumb stuff. So when dumb things happen, how does Airbnb or how does any platform kind of recover from a negative experience?
Yeah. So. The thing about trust is you can't build a trust feature. I can't tell you, oh, you just put this thing on your app or your website and then you will have trust. Trust is like it's like a reservoir. You have to fill it up. Yeah. You have to build trust. You can't just have trust. And the more trust you build, the more, if something bad does happen, you can still recover. And if a little bit of trust is lost, you can build it back again. And so one of the key things to think is not when something bad happens, how do we rebuild trust? Really, you should start before that and think, how do we always be building more and more trust with people so that if something does happen, heaven forbid, they can still trust us going forward. So yeah, bad things do sometimes happen. It's incredibly rare, but people sometimes make mistakes. People have, more often on Airbnb, they just have a different set of expectations about the experience. And when something goes wrong, it's, you've got to make sure you make it right, do whatever it takes to make it right, learn from what went wrong, and make sure you do whatever you can to make sure it never happens again. Always be improving, because things will happen, but it's really the arc and the constantly building trust that's the main thing.
Makes sense. I'm going to change gears a little bit. I mean, we've talked about communications for the last day and a half, but I don't think we're done yet. So the question that keeps me awake up late at night is, what's the role of communications for marketplaces? I'd love to hear both you, Chelsea, and Dan. What do you think? Where does communications fit in when you're thinking about building on-demand or listing services, anything to do with marketplaces?
Yeah, I think communication is a funnel for trust. It's like a vehicle for trust, right? So when you're on the curb and you're looking for your driver and you call them and the phone number is masked, maybe that gives you some sense of privacy and also trust that you can get a hold of them, and then you can negotiate the specifics. So I think it's the thing that leads to more trust and allows you to build more trust within a platform, and also have that immediacy and efficiency factor that's necessary for so many platforms.
Yeah, I think communication fits in for us. We were talking about this a little bit yesterday, actually. There's a set of communication that we on Airbnb would like to have removed. If we're communicating about is the place available, we should know those things. Is there Wi-Fi? We should know those things. But communication plays a huge role in helping people build trust. And by trust, if you take trust to mean people meeting their expectations, communication is a great way to make sure we're both expecting the same thing out of this experience. And so that's where communication plays a huge role. It allows two people to sort of really understand that they both have the same expectations about what will happen in the future, and therefore, hopefully make sure they're met and they trust each other.
It's pretty awesome, guys. We have just a little bit of time left. I want to leave enough time so that the audience has a chance to ask you guys questions. I know I prepped up quite a bit just from what was important to me and I believed would be important to the audience too. Maybe do 30-second wrap-ups as to if you were to leave the audience with one thing, what would you want to leave them with? We could start with you, Dan.
Yeah. I'll make this tweetable.
Tweet bite.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. One, the way I think about it, trust is people believing others will meet their expectations. I think second, trust is not a feature. You can't just build trust. Trust is something you develop over time with your users or between your users and yourself. If something goes wrong, make it right and learn from it and make sure it never happens again.
I would say, to expand on something I said earlier, really spend a lot of time with your early users and figuring out what they need, both on the provider and the participant side, sort of figuring out what that is. And that'll build the relationship with you and your users, and then your users with each other. And that's very, very significant into everything that you build into the platform, whether that be features or how they treat each other.
That's great. For me, I believe that trust is something that just doesn't happen. I mean, just tying back to the things that you said earlier too. It is something that you need to architect or orchestrate. But once you do that, as marketplace builders, once you start figuring it out, that what are the things that I need to do to be able to earn the trust from my users, you should expect some magical moments to come out once in a while. So I would love to be back here in a year and hear from some of you guys as to what did you enable. At this time, I want to open up the discussion to include some questions from our audience. We've got a couple of mics. We've got a first question up here. Do we have a mic? Great, thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks. I guess my question is about cross-platform and cross-marketplace reputation and how to make it more portable, because obviously once you built it up in one context, it'd be nice to be able to use it someplace else.
Right.
So the platforms don't really like to play together right now, but that might happen in the future. There are a few companies that are working on that. One of them that I know of is out of Spain called Tradey. Trait like your personality traits. A few of them have failed, mostly because the platforms don't really want to share their ratings and review systems. But I do think it's contextual as well. Like, your driver is not going to be the same type of trust as somebody that hosts you in their home. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I would like to see a portable trust identity that's not attached to any platform, whether that be Facebook or Airbnb or anything else. So I'm excited to see something maybe on the blockchain, or we'll see.
Someone said blockchain.
Blockchain.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different versions of that. There's portable identity, which you could argue something like Facebook Connect is a version of that, right? Like, there is some unique identifier that is me. That identifier can be used in multiple places to identify me. There's then like portable reputation, which I guess is sort of identity plus history, you could say. And yeah, sure. We are companies, we have competitors. One of our advantages for a company is the person who has the most history. There's value to that in a network business. And then there is, I guess, the idea of like trust as well. That one I have no idea how you'd make portable. Is there something I could look at digitally about you that would instantly make me believe you would behave the way I would expect? I'm not sure. Certainly, I think Facebook Connect is probably the only ubiquitous. Maybe you could argue Twitter Connect or Google Plus, maybe, but Facebook's maybe the only really ubiquitous identity provider around the world. I would love to see more, and I'd love to see them become richer for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got a question up there with the gentleman.
Yeah, maybe small question for both of you. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you build certain product features and even self-policing features right into the product, starting from reviews, ratings, but maybe even to search algorithm features, how you not show up certain people anymore in the search results if they, did certain things, have bad reviews, etc. So how do you bake that right into the product?
Got the mic.
I guess there's a more tactical answer. Most content types on Airbnb you can flag for moderation. If you have a message that you think is abusive or hateful, if you see content that you think is fake, if you see a review that you think is not real, a listing that's bad or whatever it might be, you can flag that, and our team will review it. Like any business, we put in place various algorithms and heuristics that sort of help us identify quickly the real problems, and so we can prioritize our resources. Yeah, I think it's just a case of like whenever you have giving people the tools to help themselves police content is a really powerful way to scale. We don't want to have to review every single message before it gets delivered, and so giving people the power and the responsibility and the tools to do it themselves is a great thing.
Dan.
Hi. So I consulted with Couchsurfing for a while after all of that. And one of the things that they did is they had a duplicate listing sort of algorithm that looked for anyone who was the same and kind of, just spamming the platform or otherwise doing things that were not kosher. And then on top of that, I would say the search algorithm looked for people that had good reviews and that had recently hosted and that were, providing value to the other users in the platform.
Yeah, question for Dan probably. You agree that communication is important to build trust up front. So I want to talk to my Airbnb host before I close the deal. Question is, this is a risk for Airbnb that I close the deal on a private basis and you'll not get your share of the deal. How do you handle that?
Yeah, great question. So there's two approaches. You can have a carrot or a stick. The stick only gets you so far, right? You can do a regex and look for strings of numbers or, spelled out versions of 1.3.5 to prevent people from sort of taking the transaction offline, protect email addresses. For anyone who's ever maintained a regex, that is not a useful way to go about things for a long time. And so really we focus much more on the sort of carrot end of the spectrum. And so if you look at, for example, the way we've structured our fees, hosts only get charged a flat 3% fee. And for that, they get home insurance, they get personal liability insurance, they get 24/7 customer service, they get a review on Airbnb, which they don't get if they take it offline, and a whole host of other features. And so really for a host, like that 3% is incredible value. And so whilst for the guest, sure, the fees are higher and you may think about, okay, how do I get the host to take it offline? What we see over and over again is the host saying, actually, I want to do it on Airbnb, because for 3%, which is not a huge amount, I get all this protection and guarantees. And so that's really the way we try and think about keeping it in the platform. Sure, it may happen, but it's not a problem that we really overly focus on right now.
I want to pitch in a little bit on this one too, because I've got the mic on me. What we saw with protecting people's, so there's one which is off-platform transactions that are mutually beneficial, and then there are sometimes off-platform interactions that are not mutually beneficial. And we see that companies that work with us, they're using Twilio to anonymize the numbers and make sure that the transaction, the communications between two parties are taken at an ad hoc period. So for the time of the ride, you're hooked up into a common number, and once the ride is done, then that number is deprovisioned, protecting privacy, also making sure that the interactions take place on the platform rather than off platform. So that's just a flip side of what just Dan said. All right, we've got time for one more question. And gentleman, Mike.
Yeah. So over the years, we've become very reserved about sharing our numbers with anyone. And as we're talking now, it becomes very hard for users to trust platforms with their numbers because they're worried about abuse from the platforms themselves as opposed to abuse from the users on the platforms. So how do you ensure, as someone creating an on-demand market, that you align yourself with interest and kind of like the safety and the privacy of the user in mind, other than saying we're not going to abuse you in your terms of service?
Phone numbers? You mean? Yeah. Sure. At a very high level, it doesn't make any sense for us, right? Like, we're a marketplace, so we make money by people having a great experience on Airbnb. If we do anything to make you not have a great experience, our business is not going to succeed. So we have absolutely, there's no interest for us to do anything untoward with your information. Of course, we're talking about your home and your address, and so we take security and privacy very seriously. In the US, certainly, and in Europe, there's a whole bunch of very clear and strict laws about what you can do with people's private information and their PII, including their phone number. And in particular, what you can do with someone's phone number and SMS. And I think all the players in the space do everything they can to make sure that they take those responsibilities very seriously.
And the other part is also building safeguards, right? So we were talking about trust. If you have the right kind of safeguards, you're going to be able to nurture it. One of the things that we were discussing with a few other people who are in the marketplaces space is how do you prevent spam calls? So you list phone numbers up there, even if they're temporary, they're listed up there that connect back to you. There's a chance someone scrapes them and starts spamming them with robocalls or just trying to sell them some stuff. And that's where things like where does the number originate from, how many calls were generated from one particular number, being able to blacklist or whitelist numbers. Those are the kind of things that, as a marketplace, you would want to invest in order to make sure that you have built the safeguards and then create trust off of that. All right, we're right at time. I know one thing that's really, really hard, and we strive to make sure that everyone who comes to Signal can go back and take something with them that they can instantly start using to improve the way that they do their work or their business. So with panels, it's really hard. So what we did was we've set up a live document in which some of us here have put in some notes. So if you would like to have some takeaways from this panel and keep them with you, text this number. We're going to go back. We have video recording of this panel as well. So we'll put in more information into the doc. You can come back at any time and you can check it out too. So for now, if you want the doc, text this number and you'll get a live link to it. Cool. I want to thank our guests. I think we got a phenomenal amount of information. So Dan, Chelsea, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.